Hello. This session focuses on assessment and error correction. The objectives for the session are to identify types of errors and reasons that learners make the errors, to consider what, when and how to correct learner errors, to identify different types and purposes of assessment, to be able to state the features of an effective assessment, and to evaluate the effectiveness of some current assessments. If we think about assessment in terms of feedback, then the purpose of assessment is mainly to tell us or the learner how well or badly they have performed. And there are two types of assessment. Summative assessment, that's what we carry out at the end of a period of learning, so there's no going back. It's the final test of a learner's performance. Or formative assessment, so this is ongoing assessment. It can be done formally or informally, but the main purpose of formative assessment is to inform correction. Okay, we offer some kind of feedback and correction to the learner so that they can improve. So those are the two types of assessment. Formative assessment and correction is what we'll be focusing on for the first part of this session, and the second part we'll be looking at more summative types of assessment. In terms of correction then, as opposed to just telling us how well or badly the learner has performed, correction also gives us a bit more information about aspects of that performance and how to improve. So the whole point of formative assessment is to enable some sort of improvement. It informs further progress. So let's think about our opinions of errors. Look at the two statements below and think about which one you most agree with. The first one, student errors are evidence that learning has not taken place. Or the second one, student errors are evidence that learning is taking place. So just think about that for a moment. I don't know whether that's the one that you decided on, but hopefully by the end of this section on assessment and error correction, we'll see that student errors can in fact indicate that they are learning. It's not a bad thing to make a mistake. Okay, so let's have a look at how we've come to that conclusion. And the first thing we need to look at is contrastive analysis, and we need to understand this and the types of errors that learners make in order to accept that learner errors are indeed evidence of learning. So first of all then, contrastive analysis, what is that? Well, this is one definition of it. I'll give you a moment to read that. So basically it's where we think about the learner's first language, look at what's similar between the first language and the target language, the language that is being learnt, and what differences there are between the two languages. And that could be in terms of grammar, lexis, pronunciation, etc., word order. So where there are differences between the learner's first language and the language that they're learning, then we can predict that the learner will make errors in that aspect. And that can help us a little bit, and it can help us to explain some types of errors, but it's not the full story. Have a look at these two quotes from William Littlewood. The first one, it's focusing on child language acquisition, where a child is learning its first language. I'll give you a moment to read that. So this is telling us that basically children learning their first language make errors, as we know if we listen to toddlers and young children speaking English or whatever their first language is, they tend to make mistakes. But Littlewood is saying that this is not just a faulty version of the adults. It's not just making mistakes. It's a result. These mistakes that the child makes are a result of systems and rules that the child is developing. Okay, so they're not just mistakes. They're actually a result of learning, and the child is learning the rules and the systems of the first language, but they might be overgeneralizing these rules, and that's where the mistakes are made, and then they will gradually adapt these rules that they've got in their head in order to prevent mistakes being made in the future. And of course all this is done subconsciously when a child's learning its first language. So, as a result of this, if we compare that to learners learning second languages, we can say that the mistakes are not a bad thing. They're not signs that they haven't learnt something. If we look at how a child learns language and develops systems and rules and applies these rules, sometimes wrongly, then we can also say the same thing about people learning a second language. And the mistakes that they make can help us to understand what's going on with language learning. So mistakes are a good thing because they're evidence of learning, and also they can give us some insights as to what's going on in the terms of the learning process. Okay, so we looked at contrastive analysis before, and we said that we can use this to help us predict the kind of mistakes that learners make. But we've just seen that mistakes are not always a result of the first language interfering. So contrastive analysis, it can be useful, but it's got its limitations because not all errors are results of transferring rules from the first language, as we've seen from children learning the first language. They're the only rules that they know. Many errors are explained with reference to the target language. The language that is being learnt can itself lead to errors being made. So let's have a look at the two main causes for errors in language learning. The first category of errors are developmental errors, and these can also be known as intralingual. So these are errors that are similar to those produced by a child learning their first language, and these are often a result of overgeneralization of rules that have been learnt or simplification of the language. The second cause for errors is first language interference, so that can also be known as interlingual errors, and these are more often errors in terms of sounds, so pronunciation, grammar and lexis. And both of these kinds of errors, both of these things that are going on, are contributing to a learner's interlanguage. So what we mean by interlanguage is the version of the language which a learner has at any one stage of development, and it's continually being reshaped. Okay, so from being a beginner to being proficient in a language, any one point in between the kind of language you're producing with all its mistakes, with the communication strategies, that is all known as interlanguage. Okay, so it's some point in between having none of the language and then being proficient in the language. Let's have a look at some of the kinds of mistakes then regarding overgeneralization and first language interference. Okay, so overgeneralization is where we use or apply our knowledge of the language that we're learning. So we learn some rules in the language, and what we can do with those rules can sometimes lead to mistakes. So sometimes the rules don't apply, so we have to learn an exception to the rule. Or sometimes we apply the rule to an item, but that item belongs in a different category. And a way to explain this can be with reference to penguins and bats. So if we learn a rule that birds fly, all birds fly, so we can apply that rule to penguins, but we know that penguins don't fly. So in that situation, penguins are an exception to the rule. The rule, birds fly, doesn't apply to penguins. So penguins are an exception. Likewise, we can apply the rule that all birds fly to bats. Bats fly, so therefore they're birds. Okay, but bats are not birds, they belong to a different category, and that's the category of mammals. So in both of those instances, the rule is applied incorrectly. It's overgeneralized. Okay, so let's put that into practice and have a look at some learner errors and see if you can tell me whether they're all overgeneralization errors, but can you tell me whether they're referring to an exception to the rule, or does the item belong to a different category? So I'll give you a few minutes to look at that, so just pause the video while you work those out. Right, here come the answers. So the first one, I would suggest that that is an example where the item, the student is applying the rule to an item which actually belongs to a different category. Okay, and that different category is reflexive verbs. Okay, so that's you don't need to worry about whether or not you understand French. It's just a different set of verbs that take a different grammatical structure. The second one, I would suggest that this is an exception situation. So generally we have the rule add s for plurals. However, the word mouse is an exception to that rule. It takes a different plural form. Okay. And finally, the third one, I would suggest that here is an example where the item belongs to a different category. So the rule adding ed, actually there are some irregular verbs which belong to a different category and they don't follow that rule. Okay, so there are some examples of overgeneralization errors. Some more here. Which rule in English do you think is being overgeneralized? So again, just pause the video and see if you can analyze the rule that the learner is applying wrongly. Okay, so the first one, the learner here, we're not knowing the rules, the learners are over applying the present continuous tense to talk about current situations. Okay, they haven't realized that the verb know generally takes the present simple tense. The second sentence, this show that, or this is overgeneralization of using that after show. The third sentence, who can Angela sees, so they've over applied the third person s there, not realizing that we don't need it after a modal verb, can. Number 4, who did write this book? Well, there they've overgeneralized the use of the auxiliary did to ask a question in the past tense. And number 5, they've overgeneralized the making the negative from the positive, and it doesn't quite work in this case. You're expected to do something here, and the opposite of that wouldn't necessarily be you're not expected. Okay, so they've overgeneralized using a negative to state the opposite to the rule. Okay, so they were some overgeneralization errors. Now we're going to have a look at some transfer errors. So this is where we're using our knowledge of our first language. Remember, overgeneralization, we use our knowledge of the language that we're learning. Transfer, this is where we use our knowledge of our first language. So do you think that transfer is more or less frequent with beginner or then intermediate learners. Okay, so it's more frequent with beginner learners. Why do you think this might be? Just think about that for a moment. Well, I would suggest that this is because beginner learners have got less second language to refer to. The only language they've got to refer to is their first language, whereas as learners progress and they get to more intermediate and advanced levels, then they've got more knowledge of the second language, of the language that they're learning, so they're more likely to make errors which are a result of the second language rather than the first language. So we're more likely to see errors of transfer with beginner learners. Let's have a look at some transfer errors then. These are mainly European languages. So we've got, it's actually quite interesting. You can actually learn a lot about other languages from the errors that learners make in English. Okay, so this is basically where they don't know what the structure is in English, so they've used their first language structure and just translated that to English, and this is what happens. So you might have noticed during your teaching placement, you might have noticed some other errors that your learners typically make. So just have a think about those and perhaps watch out for them in the future. And this sort of knowledge and understanding is quite useful when you're planning your lessons and predicting the kind of problems that students will have with whatever it is that you're teaching them. Okay, whether it's pronunciation, vocabulary or grammar. Having an understanding of the typical transfer errors related to certain languages can help us predict the kind of mistakes learners are going to make. So that's referring back to contrastive analysis, isn't it? Okay, so we've learnt a lot about errors, and they can be really useful in giving us insights into learning. So if we look at errors, those are the things that are produced by learners. So errors, the product of learning, can help us understand more about the process of learning or how a learner learns. There are some other points to note. Errors aren't just a result of generalisation or transfer. There are some other things to think about. Sometimes it's not always obvious whether it's an overgeneralisation error or a transfer error. Sometimes things aren't that clear, so there are ambiguities. It's not always very clear cut. There are other errors that are made in first language as well as second language acquisition, and these are errors of omission, telegraphic speech, redundancy reduction. So this is basically where learners simplify the language. They often miss out grammatical elements in order to simplify and get the message across. Okay, so it doesn't hinder communication, it just results in incorrect speech. Communication strategies, a lot of learners develop these in order to avoid or in order to compensate for not having the language. So we don't know whether it's a communication strategy or whether it's an actual error or a slip in the performance. So does the learner actually know the correct form and they've just forgotten it or slipped in the heat of the moment, or do they simply not know that correct version? It's hard to tell sometimes. There may be errors that learners make due to the effects of teaching. They might have been taught the wrong thing or taught badly, which has resulted in confusion. Hopefully that doesn't happen too much. Transitional errors or fossilised errors. So some errors are, as we've seen, they're a result that's showing us that learning is taking place. So they might be over applying the ed ending, whereas eventually, hopefully, that will stop and result in the correct form being used. Although we see a lot of fossilised errors. So these are errors that will never change no matter how much you tell the learner, how much you correct them, whether they understand the correct version or not. That error will never change. So we refer to those as fossilised errors, and they're often seen as a result of laziness. I don't know how true that is, but it's possibly a result of the learner getting the message across despite that error. So there's sort of subconsciously there's no need to change, there's no need to correct it. Errors can be a result of the learner's internal syllabus, where they're at in their learning, what they want to learn, what they're ready to learn, and the external syllabus. So that's what we're the curriculum, the exam syllabus, that we're expecting the learner to go through, and also the sequence of learning. We had a look when we looked at second language acquisition that certain grammatical items seem to be acquired in a certain sequence, and that doesn't always match the sequence that we teach those items in. So there's a lot more to errors than just overgeneralisation and transfer. So what do we do when we come across errors in the classroom? Okay, we've got to think about what kind of error it is. Is it an error of overgeneralisation? Is it an error of transfer? Is it an error of simplification? Is it a lexical, grammatical, pronunciation error? Okay, so there's lots of things that we have to assess at that point. And then we have to decide whether or not we deal with it. Can we let it pass? Or do we need to deal with it in some way? Then we need to decide when is the best time to deal with it. Is it there and then, at the point of the mistake being made? Or is it at a later stage, at a review at the end of the lesson perhaps? Who will correct it? Is it always the teacher who corrects errors? What about the learner themselves? What about the peers, the other members of the group? Okay, so there are some other things to think about. And then which technique to use. Do we just reformulate it correctly? Do we use fingers to highlight there's something missing? Do we perhaps use a facial expression to show that something's not right? Do we elicit the correct version? There's all sorts of techniques we can use, and we'll look at those a bit later on. Okay, so in making these decisions, we should consider a range of factors. Okay, so the first thing to think about is whether that mistake is actually preventing communication. Is it a communication hindrance? If it is, then we're more likely to step in. If it isn't, if the communication is still taking place, then we might perhaps decide not to correct or to correct later on. It depends what the purpose of the activity is. What is the aim? What are the class or lesson objectives? Are we aiming for accuracy, grammatical accuracy or pronunciation accuracy? In which case we might want to correct the error rigorously, immediately. Or are we aiming for fluency, developing learners' communication and fluency strategies and skills, in which case we might not want to interrupt with error correction. We need to consider our learners, what we know about learners. How do they feel about being corrected? Are they embarrassed? Are we at risk of humiliating them? Or are they keen to be corrected and get it right? Okay, and that's up to our skills as teachers to know what our learners can deal with. What's the most efficient way to correct? Do we spend hours and hours trying to elicit a small correction, or is it just better for all concerned just to very quickly correct it? Okay, and then we need to consider whether it's a mistake or an error. Is it a mistake, as in it's just a slip, and we know that the learner knows what the correct thing is, and so we can very quickly correct it or elicit self-correction? Or is it an error that needs more in-depth remedial teaching, which might be better suited to a later stage? Okay, so those are the sorts of things that are going through our heads when we come up against errors in the classroom. So in terms of what kind of error has been made, just take a moment here to think about the errors on the left, the 8 sentences and match them with the kind of errors they are on the right. So just pause that for a second and have a go at that. Okay, here come the answers. Okay, so the second factor, whether we deal with it, are we looking at accuracy or fluency? Is our activity, is it a communicative activity or is it non-communicative? If it's communicative, you might want to think again about jumping in and correcting everything the learner's saying. If it's non-communicative, fine. Have your correction there and then. Okay, so just, I suppose the advice there is, how important is it, how useful is it to correct? And that will all depend on what our learning objectives are. This is again something useful to consider when deciding whether or not to deal with a learner error. So I'll just give you a moment to read that. So you might want to pause and read that. So this is basically saying that, you know, sometimes the correction, if it's done in the wrong place, at the wrong time, in the wrong way, then it can have a negative effect. It can raise the learner's affective filter, and it can actually stop learning, or they might even take a backward step. Okay, so we have to be very canny about correction. And then the three other factors: when to deal with it, who will correct, and which technique to use. Well, I'm going to refer you to Scrivener's Learning Teaching, chapter 12 for that. I strongly recommend you have a look at that chapter. There's some excellent ideas and strategies for correcting learner errors in that chapter. So moving on to testing then now. So this is more a focus on the summative tests, where the focus isn't really in order to improve and offer feedback. It's for different reasons. Let's have a look at the reasons for testing then. So first of all, just pause here and think about some reasons. Why do we test our students? So pause the video and just jot down a few ideas. Okay, so here are some suggestions. We might want to, when a learner first arrives at the college, we might want to know which class to place them in. So that's when we perform a screening or a placement test. So it's just to give us a rough idea of what level class and what kind of class that student would be better in. Are they a young learner? Are they working shifts? So it's not just the level of language, it's their personal circumstances as well. And I think quite often we call these initial assessments as well. A bit more detail, we might want to know what are their particular strengths and weaknesses in the different skills, the grammatical knowledge, their writing, spelling, speaking and listening skills. So we might conduct a diagnostic test, and that will tell us a little bit more about the gaps in learners' knowledge, what the strengths and weaknesses are. We might want to, after a session of learning at the end of the class, or at the end of a term or the end of a module, we might want to just check how much has been learnt. So then we would do a progress test or an achievement test. We might want to assess generally how proficient is a learner in the language. Okay, so that's a proficiency test, the general ability in that language. And we might want to carry out a formative, we've already looked at that, formative test in order to offer feedback and correction to the learners. We might want to enable learners to see how well they're doing or what their performance currently is. So then a progress test might be appropriate. It might be that the institution requires tests. They're more likely to be summative tests. There could be tests that the centre, the institution themselves has devised, or it could be an external test like the City and Guilds or EdExcel, etc. quite often to enter university, for example, or to work in a certain profession, learners have to pass tests, language tests, such as the IELTS or the TOEFL tests, and they're testing the learner's overall proficiency and therefore their ability to do that course or that job. So those are a range of reasons. Can you think of any other reasons for testing? So just think about if any of your reasons weren't mentioned there, or if you can think of any others. According to Scrivener, he says that there are 3 criteria of a good test. He says that it should be fair and appropriate, it should be easy to mark, and it should give us clear results which serve the purpose. So it should be a valid test, in other words. It should tell us what we want to know. Have a look at these 3 examples of tests and tell me whether or not you think they meet those 3 criteria. So pause the video there and have a look at those 3 tests. Well, the first one isn't very reliable. It doesn't serve its purpose. If everyone is getting 63 or between 63 and 67 out of 100, then it's not allowing you to place them, because they'd all be placed in the same class if you gave them that test. So it's not reliable. It doesn't serve its purpose. The second test, well, that's not fair and it's not appropriate, because how will the students be expected to perform well if it's material they haven't covered yet? And the third one, well, I think that's obvious. It's not doing yourself any favours to set huge essays, because it's not easy to mark. Okay. So let's think about what we test and how we test it. So some things to think about here. Are we testing skills? So are we testing reading, writing, listening and speaking? Or are we testing systems, grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation? Are we going to devise tests that test discrete items? So tests focusing on present simple tense, or tests focusing on a particular pronunciation item? Or are we giving tasks that are integrative, that test a range of things? Is the marking going to be objective or subjective? So is it yes or no, right or wrong? Or is it more a case of levels and performance? And are we going to devise our own internal test, or are we going to use a public exam? So have a look at the following test questions and tell me, are they discrete? Are they testing one item, or are they integrative? Are they testing a range of skills and systems? And will the marking be objective, so right or wrong, yes or no, or it's subjective? So pause the video here and have a look at these test items according to those 3 questions. Okay, so the first one, I would suggest that is an integrative test. It allows us to test the learner's communication, the vocabulary, the pronunciation. It's likely to be subjective. Okay, there's no right or wrong answer. There are levels of performance. There are different ways that students can answer that. So that's going to be a subjective marking criteria. The second one, that's testing a discrete item. It's testing the verb tenses, and that's going to be objective marking. There's only one answer. There's only one possible answer there. The third one, well, this is It's integrative. I suppose you could argue that it's discrete because it's testing certain social responses. But we could be looking at pronunciation as well as vocabulary and grammar. So it's more likely to be integrative, although it's only spoken. And it's going to be subjective. Okay, there's no right or wrong answer. There's a range of possible answers to that. Number 4, fill in the gaps. That's testing a discrete item. It's testing present perfect tense. There's only one answer, so that's going to be objective marking. Although I suppose there is room for alternative answers here. So how long have you had that new car? How long have you wanted that new car? How long have you been saving for that new car? So it's not quite as objective as number 2. So there are a range of possible answers there. Number 5. So this is just testing writing skills, but it would also be looking at vocabulary, grammar, spelling, layout, etc. So it's integrative in that way. And it's going to be subjective because there's a range of answers, there's a range of performance levels there. And then number 6, reading aloud. Well, that's just testing really reading aloud skills, perhaps pronunciation, basic decoding of words. So that's going to be objective marking, how correct it is. Okay, so we've had a look at some of the theory, what some of the experts say about assessment and tests. So now I'd like you to apply those theories to your placement where you're doing your teaching. So ask your mentor about the tests. You might already have seen some of these, and you might even have participated in some of the tests. So think about at your placement, when are the learners tested? How many times? Is it when they first arrive, or is it at regular points during the year? So when are they tested? Why are they tested? Is it in order to place them in a class? Is it to check what they've learned? Is it to pass an exam at the end? Is it to progress to the next level? What kind of tests are used? Are they public? Are they external? City and Guilds, Edexcel, Cambridge exams? Or are they devised by the teacher themselves, or are they some of the tests that are produced by the what was the Department for Education? And then how are the results used? What are the results of the tests? What do we do with those? And then look at some of the tests that are used. And think about how effective they are. Think about some of the criteria that we've been looking at. Are they fair and appropriate? Are they easy to mark? Is the marking subjective or objective? Are they testing discrete items, or are they integrative? So apply some of those criteria to the tests that are available in your placement. So think about what your own opinion is as regarding their effectiveness, and also ask your mentor and maybe even the learners what they think of the tests. And a lot of this can go in your reflective journal as well as the PDE tasks that are part of the 3PF. So that's all on testing. There's a chapter from Penny Ear's book that's also available for you to have a look through, and that focuses a bit more on testing. And all the other books are available in the library, or you might even have these yourself. The Scrivener one there, it's 2005. I think the one in the library is a much more recent one. It's 2011, as is the Harmer. I think that one might be the 4th edition available in the library. Okay, so that's the end of this session on assessment and error correction.